We're dealing with the historical origin of Christianity by Dr. Walter Williams. I continue. At the time of Alexander's death in 323 BCE, Ptolemy I Lygi, also called Soter, took over the rule of Egypt. It is very important to note that the word Soter means savior, a title given to Ptolemy I Lygi as a result of his military conquests. The word savior plays an important role in the evolution of the created image called Jesus Christ and the man-made, non-spiritual religion called Christianity. Ptolemy I Soter, like Alexander, also tried to get himself accepted in the ancient Egyptian pre-society. He was also rejected for the same reasons as Alexander. At this time in history, 320 BCE, Ptolemy I Soter sought out and found a council of ancient Egyptian priests and priestesses in Memphis, Egypt, who agreed to make his image into a god. These Malachite Coptic Egyptians complied with Ptolemy I's request and made a composite using two of their ancient Egyptian gods, Asar, aka Osiris, and the sacred bull of Memphis, Apis, and during this process came up with the name Osorapis and later Serapis. They then gave the name Osorapis to Ptolemy I and gave his image the assimilated characteristics of the ancient Egyptian ancestor Asar or Osiris, thereby making Ptolemy and his image a god. They later created a devotional ritual to Serapis. He was spoken of as the savior and the leader of souls, leading souls to the light and receiving them again. The ritual goes on to say, he raises the dead, he will save us after death, and we will be protected in his providence. See the Outline of History by H.G. Wells, Volume 1. Today, the same thing is being said about this created image called Jesus, who has a created birthday of 4 BCE and a created death day of 28 or 30 ABCE. Allow me to emphasize that it was our ancient ancestors, the Coptic Malachite Egyptians, who created the image of Serapis. This, in effect, was to be used later to create the religion of Christianity by giving the Serapis icon image a human nature through a diaphysitic union, which was officially done at the Council of Ephesus in 431 ABCE. Continuation. After the Malachite Coptic Egyptian priests and priestesses in the Temple of Memphis, Egypt, fulfilled Ptolemy I's request and provided him an image of himself made into a god, man-made religion, not universally spiritual consciousness as practiced by the ancient Egyptians, came into existence for the first time in human history. Ptolemy I attempted to put his man-made icon image of himself into all the sacred temples throughout Egypt alongside the ancient Egyptian god Osiris. This was his way of getting himself accepted into the ancient Egyptian priesthood. However, as previously mentioned, this devious scheme of Ptolemy's was rejected by the entire sacred priest society throughout Egypt except in Memphis, Egypt, where the name Serapis and the icon image were created. Angered by this rejection, Ptolemy I Soter proceeded to close all the other sacred ancient Egyptian temples throughout Egypt and made it against the law for any ancient Egyptian to build any temple or building for the purpose of spiritual fellowship. The closing down of our ancestors' sacred temples during the reign of Ptolemy I Soter completely eliminated the last of the pharaoh sacred institution of ancient Egypt. This was the beginning of the erosion of the spiritual unity that the ancient Egyptian priesthood had tried to keep in place throughout Egypt during Egypt's occupation by the Greeks. The passing of this law forced the priests and priestesses to use their homes for spiritual purposes. The law stayed in effect until the time of the Roman ruler Justinian I, who in 543 ACE, along with his wife Theodora, financed and built the world's first Coptic Christian monophysite church in Syria, today called the Jacobite Church. This church was built and later named for Jacob Barderas, aka James Barderi, the Coptic Egyptian quasi-monophysite Christian who was appointed by Theodora to evangelize among the European Arabs. From monophysite Christianity, the pagan religion of Mohammedanism, Islam, was created. The Jacobite Church followers only recognized the Osiris-like characteristic in the created image of Serapis/Christ icon, and thereby did not accept or recognize a human nature in this man-made icon. The followers in the church were called Jacob monophysites. Subsequently to the closing down of our ancestors' sacred temple throughout Egypt, Ptolemy I Soter confiscated all their divine and sacred inspired writing which were written on papyrus scrolls and proceeds to store them in one of the remaining temples in Memphis, Egypt. This was the temple where his image had been made into a pagan god Serapis. Every Ptolemy ruler and later Roman ruler of Egypt sat on the throne of Egypt and became a vicar of Serapis, just as the Catholic Pope today sits on the throne of Peter in the Vatican and passes himself off as the vicar of his created image called Jesus Christ. It was Ptolemy I Soter's grandson Ptolemy III Eucharis I who built the Seraptum Temple, an annex building in Alexandria, Egypt in 240 ABCE. Today, the annex building is known in history as the Great Library of Egypt. The annex building became the Great Library of Egypt when Ptolemy III Eucharis transferred the ancient Egyptian divine scrolls into the annex building after removing them from the old temple in Memphis, Egypt, where his grandfather Ptolemy I Soter previously stored them. Thus, the annex became the Great Library of Egypt. This refutes the lie that is told about Alexander the Great building a great library of Egypt to house the supposed thousands of books of his fictitious Aristotle, his supposed teacher. Aristotle is deemed fictitious because the Greeks during the time of antiquity have an alphabet nor institution. After removing the sacred scrolls from the old temple in Memphis, Egypt, Ptolemy III Eucharis began to tear down the old temple to make way for a new temple he was to erect in Memphis, Egypt to honor Serapis called the Dionysian Temple. As we go further, you will see the significance of the annex building, the development of the man-made pagan religion called Christianity. Check.